Blood trickled down Grace Lawson's chin as she stumbled through the moonlit Texas prairie, her wedding ring abandoned miles back in the dust where she had finally found the courage to run. The year was 1878, and tonight she had escaped a death sentence disguised as marriage. Grace's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed forward, the hem of her once fine dress now torn and caked with dirt. Behind her lay the town of Cottonwood Springs, where for 3 years she had been the wife of Harold Bentley, the most respected and most feared businessman in the county. Ahead of her lay nothing but uncertainty and the vast, unforgiving landscape of the West Texas frontier. The beating she had received tonight had been the worst yet. Harold's rage had always simmered beneath the surface, but when his business deal with the railroad had fallen through, he had returned home in a fury she hadn't seen before. Grace's refusal to pour him another whiskey had unleashed his wrath, and this time she knew she wouldn't survive another. She had fled while he lay passed out, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and the small locket containing her mother's portrait. At 23, Grace was now alone in the world, a runaway wife with nowhere to go. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her blood run cold. Harold had friends in town, including the sheriff. If they found her, they would drag her back. Grace scrambled toward a cluster of rocks, praying the darkness would conceal her. The rider approached at a steady pace, not the gallop of pursuit, but the measured rhythm of someone at ease in the saddle. Grace held her breath as the silhouette drew closer, a tall figure on a paint horse, his wide-brimmed hat outlined against the star-filled sky. "Hello there," a deep voice called out. "I can see you hiding, I mean no harm." Grace remained frozen, weighing her options. The stranger dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Madam, you're bleeding, and you're a good 15 miles from anywhere. Whatever you're running from, it must be serious." Grace's legs trembled, threatening to give way beneath her. "How do I know you're not one of his men?" "I don't know who he is, madam, but I'm just a rancher passing through after delivering cattle to Fort Davis." He removed his hat, revealing a young face with kind eyes. "Name's Thomas Ackerman. Most folks call me Tucker. I can't go back," Grace whispered, swaying slightly. "He'll kill me this time." Tucker stepped forward as Grace collapsed, catching her before she hit the ground. "You'll never fear again," he said firmly, helping her to her feet. "That's a promise." Grace looked up at him, this stranger whose promise shouldn't have meant anything, yet somehow cut through her terror like a knife. "You don't know what he's capable of, maybe not." "But I know what I'm capable of," Tucker replied, his voice steady. "And I'm capable of making sure no one hurts you again." He helped Grace onto his horse, then mounted behind her. She sat rigid in the saddle, still half expecting a trap. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here," Tucker explained. "My sister Ellie lives there too. You'll be safe with us until you decide what you want to do next." As they rode through the night, Grace gradually allowed herself to lean against the solid warmth of his chest. The rhythmic movement of the horse and the steady beat of Tucker's heart lulled her into an exhausted half-sleep. The rocking ranch appeared as dawn broke over the horizon, a modest homestead with a sturdy main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a young woman with blonde hair tied back in a practical braid stepped onto the porch as they approached. "Tucker, who's this?" she called, her eyes widening at the sight of Grace's battered face. "Ellie, this is." Tucker paused, realizing he hadn't asked her name. "Grace," she supplied weakly. "Grace Lawson." "Grace needs our help," Tucker said simply, and his sister nodded without hesitation. "Bring her inside. I'll heat water for a bath and find her some clean clothes." The next few days passed in a blur for Grace. Her body was bruised and exhausted, but the Ackerman siblings treated her with a kindness she had almost forgotten existed. Ellie, just 20 years old but already possessing the practical capability of someone much older, tended to Grace's wounds and provided her with several of her own dresses. Tucker kept his distance, seeming to understand instinctively that Grace needed space. He worked his ranch during the day, but each evening at dinner, he would share stories of his cattle drives and life on the frontier that made even Grace smile despite herself. On the fourth day, as Grace sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tucker joined her, careful to leave enough space between them on the bench. "I need to ride into town tomorrow for supplies," he said. "Ellie says you're feeling better. Is there anything special you need?" Grace tensed. "Town." "Which town?" "Willow Creek. It's about 20 miles east of here." Relief washed over her, "Not Cottonwood Springs." Tucker studied her face. "Is that where you came from? Where he is?" Grace nodded. "My husband, Harold Bentley. He owns half the businesses in Cottonwood Springs, including the bank. The sheriff is his cousin." "I see." Tucker's expression darkened. "Grace, I won't pry, but if you want to tell me what happened, I'm willing to listen." The words spilled out then, the story of how she'd married Harold at 19, thinking she was securing a future after her parents died of influenza. How the charming businessman had changed almost immediately after the wedding, controlling every aspect of her life and punishing any perceived disobedience with increasing violence. "I tried to leave once before, about a year ago," Grace admitted. "He found me at the stagecoach office. When we got home," she trailed off, unable to describe the punishment that had followed. Tucker's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained gentle. "You're safe here, Grace, for as long as you need." "He won't stop looking for me," she whispered. "In his mind, I'm his property, not a person." "You're not property," Tucker said firmly. "You're a woman who deserves to be treated with respect and kindness." The following morning, Tucker prepared to ride to Willow Creek. Grace watched anxiously as he checked his saddlebags and guns. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised. "Ellie knows how to use a rifle if needed, but I doubt anyone would find this place unless they knew where to look." As he mounted his horse, Grace impulsively stepped forward. "Tucker, thank you for everything." He tipped his hat. "No need for thanks, Grace, just doing what's right." After Tucker left, Grace helped Ellie with chores around the ranch. The physical work was therapeutic, giving her mind something to focus on besides fear. "How long have you and Tucker lived here?" Grace asked as they hung laundry on the line. "About 3 years," Ellie replied. "Our parents had a small farm back in Missouri, but Pa died in the war and Ma followed a few years later. Tucker had been working cattle drives since he was 16, saving every penny. When he had enough, we came west and bought this place. You both seem so capable." Ellie laughed. "Necessity teaches quickly. Tucker's the real heart of this place, though. Never seen anyone with such a way with horses and cattle, or such stubbornness when he believes in something." "He's been very kind to me," Grace said softly. "That's who he is," Ellie replied, giving Grace a thoughtful look. "Though I must say, he's never brought home a beautiful runaway before." Grace blushed. I'm still married." "Not in any way that matters," Ellie said firmly. "A man who beats his wife has broken that covenant more thoroughly than any piece of paper could fix." When Tucker returned that evening, he brought not only supplies but also concerning news. While in Willow Creek, he'd overheard talk of a wealthy businessman from Cottonwood Springs offering a substantial reward for information about his confused and unwell wife who had wandered off. "He's telling people I'm mad," Grace said, her voice hollow. "That I'm not in my right mind." "It's a common tactic," Tucker replied grimly. "Makes it easier to dismiss anything you might say against him." "Did anyone in Willow Creek seem to know about me being here?" Tucker shook his head. "No, but we should be cautious. I bought you these." He handed her a small package containing a man's shirt, trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat. "If we need to move quickly, or if you need to be less noticeable." The practicality of his thinking touched Grace. He wasn't just offering temporary shelter, he was helping her plan for continued freedom. As the days turned into weeks, Grace found herself settling into life at the Rocking A. She learned to help with the cattle, discovered she had a talent for gardening, and even began to sleep through the night without waking in terror. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they came less frequently. What also grew was her awareness of Tucker. His gentle strength, his unwavering respect for her boundaries, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, all of it combined to create feelings that both thrilled and terrified her. She couldn't allow herself to care for him, not when her very presence put him and Ellie in danger. One evening in late June, nearly 2 months after her arrival, Grace found Tucker in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal. She stood watching as his large, capable hands moved with surprising delicacy, checking the animal's condition. "She's close," he said without looking up. "Probably tonight. Can I help?" Grace asked. Tucker smiled. "Of course, I could use an extra pair of hands. It's her first foal, so she's a bit nervous." They worked side by side through the night, speaking in soft voices to keep the mare calm. When the foal finally arrived, a spindly-legged colt with a white blaze down his face, Grace found herself crying with joy. "He's beautiful," she whispered as the newborn struggled to stand on wobbly legs. Tucker reached out without thinking and brushed a tear from her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. "Thank you for staying with me tonight," he said, his voice husky. Grace looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing despite all the reasons they shouldn't. Tucker stepped back first, clearing his throat. "You should get some sleep," he said. "I'll stay with them a bit longer." Grace nodded, suddenly shy. "Good night, Tucker." As she walked back to the house under the brightening dawn sky, Grace allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, a future where she could be free to love again. The following Sunday, Tucker suggested they all attend church in Willow Creek. "It might be good for you to meet some folks," he explained, "and to be seen as part of our household rather than someone in hiding." Grace was nervous but agreed. Dressed in her best borrowed dress from Ellie, she sat between the siblings in the small wooden church, trying not to flinch when people glanced curiously in her direction. After the service, Tucker introduced her simply as Miss Grace, who's staying with us for a while. Most people accepted this without question, though Grace noticed a few speculative looks exchanged between the older women. They were just preparing to leave when a man Grace didn't recognize approached them, his eyes fixed intently on her face. "Pardon me, madam, but you look mighty familiar," he said. "Haven't I seen you over in Cottonwood Springs?" Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Tucker stepped slightly in front of her, his posture casual but protective. "I doubt it," he said easily. "Miss Grace is my cousin from back east. Just arrived last month." The man looked unconvinced. "There's a fella over in Cottonwood offering good money for information about his wife. Said she's got red hair just like the lady here." "Then he'll be disappointed," Ellie interjected smoothly. "Our cousin has never been to Cottonwood Springs. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to be getting back to the ranch." They made it to their wagon without further incident, but Grace's hands trembled as Tucker helped her up to the seat. "He didn't believe us," she whispered. "He's going to tell Harold." "We don't know that," Tucker said, though his expression was grim, "but we'll be extra careful for a while." For the next week, Tucker took to sleeping in the barn with his rifle nearby. Grace could barely eat or sleep, jumping at every sound and scanning the horizon constantly for riders. The fear she had begun to leave behind returned with a vengeance, made worse by her guilt at having brought danger to the Ackermans' door. Late one night, she made a decision. Packing the few belongings she'd accumulated and donning the men's clothing Tucker had bought her, Grace wrote a brief note thanking the siblings for their kindness, but explaining she couldn't risk their safety any longer. She planned to catch the westbound train at Willow Creek and disappear. She was just slipping out the back door when a voice stopped her. "Were you going to leave without saying goodbye?" Tucker stood in the shadows of the porch, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Grace froze. "I can't stay, Tucker. You and Ellie have done too much for me already." "I won't be the reason you get hurt." He stepped forward, moonlight revealing the pain in his eyes. "And what about the hurt of waking up tomorrow and finding you gone? Have you considered that?" "It's better than the alternative," she insisted. "Harold is dangerous." "If he finds me here, then we'll face him together," Tucker interrupted. "Grace, running alone isn't the answer. You deserve more than a life always looking over your shoulder." "What choice do I have?" she demanded, tears welling in her eyes. Tucker took another step closer. "Stay. We'll figure this out, He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "I care about what happens to you, Grace, more than I should, maybe, but I can't just let you disappear into the night. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the silence. Multiple riders coming fast, Tucker's expression hardened. "Get inside, wake Ellie and both of you go to the root cellar. There's a loaded shotgun down there, use it if you have to." "Tucker, go, Grace, now." She ran inside, heart pounding. Ellie was already awake, grabbing her robe. "I heard them," she said. "Come on," but Grace shook her head. "I can't hide anymore, Ellie. This is my fight." She grabbed the rifle that hung over the fireplace and checked that it was loaded, just as Tucker had taught her. Then, ignoring Ellie's protests, she stepped back onto the porch beside Tucker. 4 riders pulled up in the yard, their horses lathered from hard riding. In the lead was a man Grace recognized from Willow Creek Church, and beside him, his face twisted with triumph, sat Harold Bentley. "There she is," Harold called out, his voice slurring slightly. Even from a distance, Grace could tell he had been drinking. "Playing house with some cowboy while I've been searching high and low." Tucker's hand found Grace's in the darkness, squeezing once before letting go. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Then, louder, "You're trespassing on private property, gentlemen. I suggest you turn around and leave." Harold dismounted, swaying slightly. "I've come for my wife, Cowboy. This doesn't concern you. Your wife isn't here," Tucker replied evenly. "Just my family and me." "That's her right there," Harold shouted, pointing at Grace. "Grace, stop this foolishness and come home where you belong." Grace stepped forward, the rifle steady in her hands. "I am home, Harold." Harold's face darkened. "You ungrateful whore. After everything I've done for you, you mean like the broken ribs last Christmas?" Grace interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "Or the time you locked me in the cellar for 3 days because I spoke to the minister without permission?" The other riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "She's lying," Harold said quickly. "My wife is unwell, has spells of confusion and makes up stories." "I'm not confused, Harold, not anymore." Grace kept the rifle aimed at his chest. "Go back to Cottonwood Springs. We're finished." Harold's face contorted with rage. "You're my wife under the law. You have no right. The law doesn't give you the right to beat a woman half to death," Tucker interjected coldly. "Now get off my property before I forget my manners entirely." For a moment, it seemed Harold might back down. Then his hand moved to his hip, reaching for the pistol holstered there. Tucker was faster. His gun cleared its holster in one smooth motion, aimed squarely at Harold's chest. "Don't," Tucker warned. One of the other riders, an older man with a weathered face, spoke up. "Bentley, you didn't say nothing about your wife being afraid of you, or about her being beaten. You said she was confused and sick." "She's lying," Harold spat. "She's always been a liar." "Then explain the scars on her back," Ellie called from the doorway, where she now stood with a shotgun. "Explain the nightmares that wake her screaming your name." The older rider looked at Grace's face, studying her with new understanding. Then he turned to Harold. "I think we've been misled, Bentley. I didn't sign up to drag a terrified woman back to a man who beats her." "Neither did I," agreed another of the riders, Harold's face twisted with fury. "You spineless fools, she's my property." "No," Tucker said, his voice like steel. "She's not property. She's a person who deserves better than what you've given her." Harold's hand twitched toward his gun again, and this time he managed to draw it. But before he could aim, Tucker fired, the shot echoing across the ranch. Harold crumpled to his knees, clutching his shoulder, his own gun falling to the dirt. The other riders made no move to help him or to threaten Tucker. The older man even nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that justice had been served. "Take him back to Cottonwood Springs," Tucker told them, "and spread the word that Grace Lawson died on the frontier. It's better for everyone if Harold Bentley believes his wife is beyond his reach forever." The men agreed, binding Harold's wound and helping him back onto his horse despite his stream of curses and threats. Before they rode away, the older rider tipped his hat to Grace. "I'm sorry, madam." "If I'd known the truth." Grace nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As the riders disappeared into the night, taking Harold with them, she finally lowered the rifle, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. Tucker gently took the weapon from her and handed it to Ellie. Then he turned to Grace, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" Grace looked up at him, this man who had risked everything to protect her. You shot him, she said, still processing what had happened. I aimed for his shoulder, Tucker replied. I'm not a killer, Grace. But I couldn't let him hurt you again. What if he comes back, or sends the law after you? Tucker shook his head. Those men saw the truth tonight. They'll make sure people in Cottonwood Springs hear a version of events that discourages Harold from pursuing this further. And if he's foolish enough to try again. He left the sentence unfinished. Grace swayed on her feet, the emotional exhaustion of the night catching up with her. Tucker caught her elbows, steadying her. I almost left tonight, she whispered. I was running away to protect you and Ellie. I know, he said softly, but you don't have to run anymore, Grace, not ever again. In that moment, with the danger past and the future suddenly wide open before her, Grace gave in to the feelings she'd been fighting. She reached up and touched Tucker's face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. When you found me that night, she said, you promised I'd never fear again. I didn't believe you then. Tucker turned his face slightly to kiss her palm, and now I believe you. He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. Grace Lawson, I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood up from those rocks, bleeding and terrified but still fighting. I know your heart has been through hell, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, I'm here. Grace felt tears well in her eyes, but for once they weren't tears of fear or pain. I'm ready now, she whispered. I've been ready for weeks, just too afraid to admit it. When Tucker's lips finally met hers, it was like coming home. Gentle at first, then deeper as years of fear and loneliness melted away in the warmth of newfound love. Ellie cleared her throat from the porch, reminding them they weren't alone. I'm going back to bed, she announced with a grin. Try not to stay up all night mooning over each other. We've got cattle to tend in the morning. They laughed, breaking apart but keeping their hands linked as they walked back to the house together. The legal dissolution of Grace's marriage took nearly a year, requiring trips to Austin and testimony about Harold's abuse. But with the support of witnesses from that night and a sympathetic judge, Grace eventually received papers declaring her a free woman once more. She and Tucker married the following spring, with Ellie as their only attendant and the newborn foals grazing in the pasture, beyond the small gathering of friends who had come to celebrate with them. As they exchanged vows beneath the blue Texas sky, Grace thought about the night she had fled into the darkness, certain her life was over. Instead, it had just begun, years passed, and the rocking prospered. Grace and Tucker welcomed 2 children, a daughter with her mother's red hair and a son with his father's steady nature. Ellie eventually married the local doctor and moved to Willow Creek, though she visited often. They heard that Harold Bentley had left Cottonwood Springs after losing much of his fortune to gambling and poor investments. The news brought neither joy nor sorrow to Grace, just the peaceful realization that he no longer held any power over her life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Tucker surprised Grace with a locket to replace the one she had carried when she fled the only remnant of her previous life. This new one contained miniature portraits of their children on one side and on the other, a tiny scrap of paper with the words that had changed her life. You'll never fear again. Do you remember saying that to me? Grace asked as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Tucker smiled, his arm around her shoulders. I remember everything about that night, the way the moonlight caught in your hair despite the dirt and blood. How you tried to look brave even though you were terrified, the moment you decided to trust me enough to get on that horse. I didn't have many options, Grace teased. True enough, he agreed with a chuckle, but you've had plenty of options since and you chose to stay. To build this life with me. Grace leaned into his embrace, savoring the security she had once thought impossible. Best choice I ever made, Cowboy. As darkness settled over the land they had made their own, Grace Ackerman closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, and for the love that had saved her in more ways than she could count. She had escaped a husband's hand, and a cowboy had taken her hand instead, promising she would never fear again. It was a promise he had kept every day as they built their life together on the wild Texas frontier.